Hi, good morning, all. I'm Ann Bradley, Chief Privacy Officer at Nike, where I also lead all things digital transformation from a legal perspective. I came to Nike after a first career as a software developer and then a lawyer in a law firm. And I'm going to hand it over to Beth to introduce herself.
Thanks, Ann. My name is Beth Hill. I work for FordDirect as General Counsel, Chief Compliance Officer, and I also lead our privacy program. I've been in automotive for the better part of 20 years, where I've always done privacy as part of my job, representing different groups, but actually wrote my first privacy policy in private practice during Internet Bubble #1 in 1998. So I've been doing this a long time, and I'm looking forward to being here with you today. And with that, I will pass it over to Ron.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ron DeJesus. I am the Chief Privacy Officer at Grindr, which is the world's largest LGBTQ social media app. Before that, I led the privacy function at Tinder and Match Group, and also developed privacy programs at Coach, American Express, and various other companies. And before that, I was a privacy consultant with the Big Four. So have experience on both sides, and I'm excited to be here to talk to you guys today about our pain points, and I'll kick it over to Thomas.
Hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thomas Adhumeau, so I'm Didomi's Chief Privacy Officer. For those of you who don't know Didomi, it's a SaaS platform providing consent and preferences management for publishers and advertisers. I qualified as a lawyer in Paris about 10 years ago, right before the European Commission came up with a proposal to reform the data protection rules in Europe. I didn't know that back then, but it was called the GDPR. And since then, I've been in this space dealing with privacy challenges and issues. And with that, I'll pass it on to Stuart.
Thanks, Thomas. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Stuart Lee. I am the Chief Privacy Officer over at VMware. We are a cloud and virtualization software company. Much like Ron, my biggest introduction to privacy came from the Big Four, where I helped to roll out global privacy programs across many continents, especially in that pre-GDPR era. Although my first introduction to privacy was when I was working in the education sector, and then as a PhD student doing research and collecting data. So kind of wanted the data, and now I talk about protecting the data. So it's come full circle. Very excited to be joined on this fantastic panel today of fellow CPOs to talk about some of our biggest technical privacy pain points we experience when we are designing and building and deploying global privacy programs. And I say designing and building because, as we all know, privacy is such an evolving field. New laws are coming out all the time, and we're having to respond about how we're going to be able to meet those requirements. And we're in a perfect storm right now. And I say that because, first, we keep seeing this explosion of new laws, all those new requirements. Many of you have probably seen, I think it was Gartner that said by 2023, 65% of the world will be covered by some type of privacy law. I think that may be a little bit shy of where we actually end up. I think there's going to be a lot more coming down the road. And then, of course, there's all the new guidance and requirements and court decisions that we see. And our stakeholders internally look to us to describe the what, the why, and the how. And that's often where the technical aspects come in. We also see a lot more people with more privacy awareness or privacy literacy. And so they're coming and asking us questions about how we're using data, and we need to be able to respond to those within timeframes that's set by the law. And then also internal stakeholders wanting answers. And those timeframes are often shorter because they need to do their own deployments and their own initiatives and thinking about how they're using data. And of course, amongst all of that, privacy teams are not exploding in size. We're remaining pretty static. And so we turn to technology to help us think about these different solutions, these different challenges, and how we're going to really keep the lights on for our own compliance when it comes to things like subject access requests, instant response, consent management, and the like. So with all this greater complexity, this greater demand, and somewhat of a flat growth, We turn to technology to help us think through these situations and these solutions to help us move faster. But indeed, this has created a whole nother challenge, particularly in the advent of the GDPR, when the explosion of the privacy tech space occurred, and many different solutions to help solve different problems along the way. And how do we think about that? How do we bring together this privacy tech stack to manage a lot of these things? Some might have done homegrown solutions, and we'll probably get into some of that today, but then also bringing some of the things off the shelf. Either way, this has created problems for us across the industry, and excited to talk about that today with this panel. And maybe, Anne, you can start us off with some of those specific technical privacy pain points that you're seeing.
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. It is a tricky time out there in privacy tech. You know, there are just a lot of things that as an in-house counsel, I would like to see different. And one of the biggest challenges is with the explosion of new privacy tech solutions, just understanding how they're going to interoperate inside of existing platforms within companies. And I guess if I were sort of guiding entrepreneurs in this space and trying to give feedback on what would be helpful, it would be, you know, remember that you are going into an installed software application platform that is complicated. And so, you know, that is an important context to bring. And as you're building solutions, certainly ones that you're trying to bring to companies at like Nike's size, they need to work with other technology platforms that we already have. So for example, incident management or ticketing and workflow management, large companies usually already have those. I think the other big issue that we're facing, and it may be an industry-wide issue, is related to the maturity of purpose limitation controls across, you know, just these large existing networks, data stores, and tech platforms. So I think we're all wrestling with the fact, you know, to my tech team, I call them use controls. They're used to access controls, so I call them use controls. But just the fact of us having to put a whole set of technical controls into platforms that only had access controls before, and make architects, software developers, network engineers aware of a whole new layer of complexity around managing how data is used, not just who's allowed to access it. That has been the challenge of the decade. And I think whoever can help companies crack that at scale across their existing platforms will definitely win the prize in the privacy tech space.
Yeah.
Beth, want to kick it to you just to talk about that.
Okay. And you just articulated in the most eloquent way things that I've been thinking for at least the last 3 years. So thank you for that, because you're right. And it is one of the biggest challenges we all face. And I don't have a software engineering background like you do, but I think that must be so helpful. I did take a lot of coding classes early on, mostly so I can understand. And I feel like all of us, whether we're privacy lawyers or privacy operational people or privacy analysts, we do more than that too. And understanding that technology can help solve some of these big challenges and figuring out how to articulate that to not just your technical people, but also your leaders and your product design people and your, you know, the people that are approving your budget is also half the challenge too. There's this whole big challenge around how do we find that technology? And I'm sure, like many of you, we're looking at different potential technology vendors all the time, because it seems like there's pieces out there, but nobody's really cracked the code in one particular area. And I'm just going to talk, you know, about one of, you know, our pain points that continues to be a pain point, which is simply data mapping. And I work for a joint venture between a very large company and 3,000 very small companies, automotive dealers. So you've got one group that's, you know, maybe used to data mapping and has a whole entire infrastructure, and we're doing things in the middle with these little companies that are not sophisticated, you know, for the most part. And how do you manage that, you know, when most technology is built, you know, or enterprise technology is built for, you know, a single client versus thousands and thousands in the ecosystem, and how do you scale that? I wrote down a couple notes, which I'll just, you know, talk, because there's so much when it comes to data mapping. How do you even start? how do you start with, is it because of a legal or regulatory mandate? Do you want a complete inventory of your entire system, certain applications? Do you take a top-down approach, mapping your processes first to identify those that have personal information? Or you do the bottom-up approach where you query every asset owner in IT to say, who's got personal information on their systems? So, many of us have done both. And, sometimes there's discrepancies, and how do you manage that? Then the sustainability issue is always, interesting. I for several years, I had a, probably an 8-foot long literal data map from some sophisticated, big software provider that did data mapping. And we had a guy take an entire year to build this beautiful map. And it was color coded, and you can drop down into all the systems that had personal information, and it was outdated on the day he made it. So how do you continue? What is the right cadence? How much do you update it? How many resources do you need to make sure it stays updated? What are the processes you have to build into, whether it's your software development lifecycle or some other process that you have, and multiply that challenge by the number of systems, by the number of applications, all of that interoperability. And then, one more, I'll just say, where do you record those movements, right? How in the map do you articulate where the data moves from the systems of record to the different places inside and outside? So that is one of the big areas that, I think many companies, including ours, are faced with on a regular basis. And if there was a great solution, we would definitely love that. And with that, I will turn it over to Stuart to talk about end-to-end DSARs.
Yeah, listening to you both, Anne and Beth, the interoperability issue and the data mapping issue, DSARs bring it all to a head, right? Obviously, a lot of us rely on our records of processing activity or our data flow maps to help us respond to data subject access requests when they come in. But exactly to what you just said, Beth, they're often out of date very quickly. And that's not even considering shadow IT and where there may be data sets that you're not aware of that you've got to go and find and keep up to date. For us, when we were looking at it, particularly as the GDPR came in, we anticipated an increase in DSAR requests for many reasons, but mostly because we thought that there was going to be an increased awareness in those rights. And so we wanted to have a solution that could respond to that. But that interoperability between our systems just wasn't there. And so we had to, one, bring in a provider that could help us go and find the data, but then two, start building additional APIs to help us source other data where they weren't able to support, and then think about the workflow solutions that you mentioned, and to be able to bring it all back together and then provide it back to individuals securely. Of course, there's another part of all of that conversation that becomes even more challenging, which is the data redaction aspect. And if you have troves of data, particularly unstructured data, some of those abilities to go and do that data redaction are quite costly or they're timely. And so you have to choose, are you going to spend person's time or are you going to spend corporate dollars on being able to go and do that redaction effort? And so that presented a huge challenge for us. And in this way, we ended up very much doing a kind of a combo of a buy and build approach to doing this, because that's the only way we could get around those interoperability issues and scaling issues. So that's really where we went from there, but definitely with the kind of the mapping aspect and then the DSARs, that created a real problem. And of course, I think next about the DSAR piece, I'm thinking about the movement of data, particularly across borders, and how much of an issue that is today. And Thomas, maybe that's something you want to get into.
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. I was actually taking notes as you guys were talking. That's very valuable feedback, because I've got two hats today. I'm a CPO, but I'm also working for a privacy tech, so that's really interesting. And to the point you mentioned, Stuart, regarding data transfers, it's actually very related to what Beth was articulating around data mapping. As you may be aware of, data transfers, in particular to the US from the EU, have been made somewhat complicated since the Schrems 2 decision in July 2020. I'm not going to go into details as to what the case was about, but I'd say that it's now mandatory for controllers to actually map all the transfers that are occurring across borders, and more importantly, assess if there is anything in the law of the receiving country, say the US, that may affect the effectiveness of the tools that you use or rely on to transfer the data. And in fact, I think it doesn't make any sense that each lawyer at every company, each chief privacy officer or data protection officer has to work on what the law says in a given country and whether it actually brings the level of protection that we all need to meet the requirements. We all use the same tools, be it AWS, Google, Microsoft, when it comes to cloud services. And so I think it doesn't make sense that it doesn't exist a solution today that could address those issues and could actually map the transfers that are exactly the same for so many companies, so that if I had a wish list, that would be on top of it. This is definitely something I'm working on at the moment, and we've had a couple of decisions in Europe on the matter. In a way, what I'm looking for is what us Didomi offer as a consent management platform. When there are new guidance in local markets, in Italy, for example, or in France, we're going to immediately update the consent notice that we offer so that it meets the new requirements, and so that our customers don't even have to think about it. It's already compliant. So I would be looking for a solution like this when it comes to data transfers. And Stuart, I don't know if you have Ron, do you have anything to add?
I definitely would love, Ron, your additional thoughts. I mean, obviously, Thomas, what you said there was, to me, talk to the idea of that challenge of that kind of keeping things up to date as those new requirements come up and come out. And I think that tracking in and of itself is a challenge. But before I go down that rabbit hole, Ron, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I've had a really good opportunity to at least I believe my perspective is well-rounded, because I've had opportunities to assist clients operationalize these types of tools, and I've implemented these types of tools myself in-house. And from what I've seen in the market, there hasn't been one vendor that really does this well, I think, soup to nuts, in terms of operationalizing a privacy program end to end. I've seen tools that purport to do XYZ, but their PIA tool doesn't have any, intelligent logic built in. I've seen DSAR tools that, require that the identity verification process be manual and, separate from that specific DSAR tool. And just as, Beth and Anne had mentioned, interoperability is a key issue as well. A lot of the folks that I work with are in product and engineering, and they're Atlassian houses, right? They work primarily with Jira and Confluence. And again, some of these tools purport to interoperate well with those existing vendors, and they truly don't. So those are the types of challenges that I've seen, at least from an interoperability perspective, and then just from an overall kind of operational perspective. I've also seen some clients have issues with mobile CMPs, so your consent management platforms, their apps getting rejected by the App Store because those tools aren't, consistent with, AT&T requirements. So I'm seeing a lot of this in the industry, and I think that, the current vendors need to focus really well on, either a specific type of tool and work on those. I think there's a few key elephants in the room when it comes to kind of end-to-end solutions. And I think that those types of vendors need to really focus on one or two good pieces before purporting to offer kind of end-to-end privacy operational management tools. And so some of the other things that I'd like to recommend are also to, for these vendors to engage with the privacy community. You can't walk the walk, and you need to walk the walk in addition to talking the talk. And I've only seen a few vendors where their product folks have actually lived and breathed privacy from an operational perspective. And so I think that's really key, having folks in-house with that pragmatic expertise to help build these tools. And Anne, I don't know if you had anything to add there. I know you had some issues kind of in-house as well around interoperability, but any other comments to add?
I think it's like an expansion of what I was talking about earlier, which is that there are a lot of privacy tech vendors offering front-end solutions that will make representations and agreements with your customer. And it's like, as an in-house practitioner, making the representation and agreement to the customer is the extremely easy part. Living up to it is the very hard part. So while as a tech vendor, you might think, I'm making, your consent platform and I'm going to change it for France when they change their laws. I go like, cool, I'm glad the front end changed. Now, who's going to run down the 75,000 people at Nike who need to know that we've changed our representation? And now the back end controls need to change. And so we can actually honor that, or else we're inviting scrutiny from American regulators under Section 5 for making a misrepresentation in our privacy statements. So like the number of risky misrepresentations that vendors are offering to make automatically for large companies is shocking, given that, we have to stand behind the representation of whatever the consent framework was or whatever the collection agreement is. And right now, and this goes back to the earlier point, there's just an inadequate apparatus for honoring those promises that we make to consumers. Like the big data stores stitch everything together. All of the data pipelines aren't able to selectively separate an advertising use from a personalization use, from a, analytics use. And so I think if there's a place where those two things come together, that interoperability issue for us as privacy pros, it's that there's a lot of front end out there, and there's not a lot of back end. There's a lot of workflow management and not a lot of discovery tools. And there's, I think the opportunity space is just to get a little bit more technical, as we saw happen in the cybersecurity industry over the last 20 years, get a little bit more standardized, recognize that there are really common shared problems that we have in the privacy technical space as well, but that they go beyond the operations of the privacy office. Like there's a much bigger opportunity there. It's not just the things that the chief privacy officer has to tell people, like get their consent and send them a notice. I think the opportunity space is in the back end. I don't know, Stuart, were we going to kick to some of our earlier questions after this?
Yeah, I think we can move forward and start thinking about, what are some of the roadblocks to all of this? We've been talking about. Obviously, Anne, you set us up there really well with that. What's the back end look like? But Thomas, maybe you want to expand on some further thoughts there about what are some of the big roadblocks we see to really overcoming these tech privacy hurdles?
My situation may be a bit different again because I work for privacy tech. So whenever I feel there is something that I need, I can always walk to my product team and try to advocate for it to be developed. And also, I'm probably not facing the same challenges that you are facing at major companies or global companies. So it's probably a bit different. But I would say that at Didomi, we eat our own dog food in a way. So I'm always the first person to benefit from the new features and new products and services that we offer. And so to your point, and on the back end, I'm always having, this in mind and providing the feedback that the product team needs, because I know how challenging it can be for CPOs when it's not just about delivering a kind of notice to users.
That's important. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people are getting that wrong, and that is the way to, be out on the porch waving the flag of non-compliance. So I don't mean to undermine that in any respect, but it's just so critical that we show that we can walk the talk.
No, absolutely. But so if I have to take a step back and look perhaps at the big picture, so not focusing on my work specifically, because I get to talk to many privacy experts or chief privacy officers in Europe, at least, most of the time what I hear, and we've already touched on this, it's the integration problem, like the fact that solutions don't always interoperate with existing systems or processes, but with other tech solutions. And so I think that's going to be the biggest roadblocks for an end-to-end platform that covers all the needs. And it's also probably due to the fact that privacy, to a certain extent, is not a mature market. So we'll get there eventually, but that's going to take time. And that's why I think privacy tech providers should be focusing on what they know, what they can deliver to their customers before scaling and thinking about extending their offering. I think they should be really delivering like a valuable product, even if it's very narrow in terms of scope.
I couldn't agree more, Thomas. And I think, there's a question that came up, but I also want to have Beth take a first pass at. How are we kind of pitching these solutions to our stakeholders internally? How are we kind of getting everybody on the same page rather than creating more confusion as we think about these new solutions? And indeed, related to that, how have you kind of used some of those strategies to solve some of these problems?
Yeah. And again, I'll say that Anne really hit it on the head. The front end, I've always been taught by my technology clients that the front end is 10 to 20% and the back end is all the rest. And that's where the challenges lie in anything, in any application or any system. And I'll start with a practical, tip that I use and have for years, which is, of course, this is all a team sport. So you have to maintain very close relationships with your technology team, with your product team, with your security team. And I always, show a bridge visual of all the touch points across so that we're working together, because without that collaboration, having worked at big companies and now a small company tied to a big company, those collaboration points and the ability of the teams to work together is usually how, you solve any of these challenges. And they're challenges. So as much as this is kind of, a gripe session for all the problems we're having, the opportunity is so huge, right? I mean, this is parallel to the maturity of any software in any industry. I mean, we recently started using a board governance software, and that industry is super mature now. I mean, security itself has gotten so mature over the last 2 decades. Privacy still feels less mature, and I think it is, but that means there's so much opportunity for all the tech companies that are out there trying to build solutions, for the in-house practitioners, for the companies, small, medium, and large. And how do you do that? Our most recent example of a technology pain point was the beginning of CCPA. We bought a industry standard SaaS tool that everybody was using because that was what the team recommended at the beginning of our CCPA compliance planning, and it didn't work for us. And it's a common thing that I've talked to many people, about, and we switched it out. We went through that, hard decision to say, you know what, it's not working for us. Here's why. The volume, the automation, the APIs and integrations, just, the off-the-shelf stuff just didn't work for us, and the customizations weren't happening. And it just, we had to explain, why we were, and we invested quite a bit. But the systems they weren't talking to each other, and it just wasn't working. So we had to, do a shift and a pivot and go to a different solution. And it was, many weeks of hard work and months of a lot of people switching things, but ultimately for a better result. And again, it was a tough pill to swallow, but something we had to do. And you just have to get through those things and you learn from it. And you know, next time you'll do some things different.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Beth. I've, helped clients with their proof of concepts with some of these tools. And my number one recommendation, or what I've seen, is that come with a really well-defined list of requirements. When you look at these vendors and they're providing, high-level demos, everything looks shiny, brand new, great, but it truly may not work with your environment. So make sure that your proof of concept really has your own customized key requirements and have them fully demonstrate that in your environment. There have been a couple of times where, the tooling just didn't work with the existing tool sets that we had. It wasn't fit for purpose for what we wanted to do. And, we decided not to proceed based on the fact that, and again, the tool looked shiny and brand new and great from a demoing perspective, but given our environment, it just didn't fit. And I've had situations where we look back, lessons learned at the end of the day, and built something in-house because it was, it worked better for our existing vendor tools. So number one recommendation is again, push for that proof of concept to demonstrate everything that you need that tool to do. And, just make sure to have that list of requirements ready.
Yeah, and Ron, I would add to partner with your engineering teammates in terms of defining the performance requirements for these tools.
Absolutely.
Because lawyers tend to think about what they need to do, but don't always think about how fast they need to do it or how reliably they need to do it. So I've seen a lot of technical solutions that are kind of negotiated with lawyers go in-house and then not be well metabolized by the technology team because they don't really approach scale or performance at the level that's expected. And in that perspective specifically, if it's going to be something in your production consumer environment, meaning something that's going to pop a cookie modal or something that's going to actually present something to a consumer, get technical evaluation of whether that's going to be performant inside of your consumer environment. I know it's a kind of nerdy tip, like a wonk tip, but I think it's really worth it to have a technical advisor by your hand evaluating the performance and how is this going to fit in our platform, in addition to all of the things you're looking out for, does it work for us? Does it work with the other tools? Is it going to deliver the result we need? It's just so much easier to find a good partner early and have them sort of help you along the process.
Absolutely, and it's something you just reminded me of is we're a small community. Ask your peers what their experience was with those vendors. There's been multiple times that I've just reached out to my LinkedIn groups and said, what are the common pain points you guys are experiencing? Have you been experiencing this with your DSAR tool, and how did you get around it? So reach out to the peers that you have access to. Again, I think the privacy community is quite close knit, and we have the opportunity to kind of have that dialogue.
Yeah, and I think we're all kind of touching around that conversation of buy v build. Particularly, I think when the GDPR came in or the CCPA were coming in, we were having those conversations much more. Maybe Ron, you want to kind of take a first pass at some of those big pain points, some of those big decisions you went through when having that buy v build type conversation internally.
Sorry, Stuart, you're cut out on the last part.
Sorry, the buy v build, what are some of your top tips, your top pain points, your experiences there in those conversations?
Yeah, again, I think it's just, at least from when I've helped clients, there's been some privacy tooling fatigue. And I try to come at it as I do with anything that I'm implementing, getting top level executive buy-in in terms of what's the problem that we're trying to solve. A lot of the times when you're presenting to your executive leadership, you do use the 4% turnover kind of stick, if you will, to get buy-in for support for your privacy program. And I use the same strategy with privacy tooling around the fact that it will help compliance overall. We have these emerging laws, every quarter. And so I think presenting that business case is really key, and getting that top level support for the budget, for the resources, as Anne mentioned, the cross-functional collaboration is really important. So for me specifically, it's been really, really important to get executive level buy-in before I even approach vendors. And so for me specifically, I think I would start there.
Mm-hmm. I think another part of the conversation has to be, one is, what is your existing tech stack? I think a lot of us, and you kind of alluded to it earlier on, if you have a Jira instance or if you're using some other workflow management tools, you may already have the capabilities that you just need to tweak to and I say tweak, and by no means don't want anybody to think I'm underestimating the size of that work, but you have the capabilities in-house to really drive, versus if you're smaller organization, maybe don't have the size of the team to help you, that might also push you towards more of an off-the-shelf solution. But Anne, what's your thoughts there, and particularly some of your experiences when kind of considering that, what you already have versus what you could go and buy?
You know, I was thinking about what Beth was talking about, an interesting setup that she has in her business, which is that they have this kind of large company and small company stakeholder dimension. And we see a lot of that too at Nike in our, wholesale and retail distribution space, where we've got, kind of sometimes a small company inside of a certain territory running our retail doors, sort of unable to meet the same kind of requirements that you might at a large company with all of the resources you have. So, I think that there is a really important place for build and buy solutions across the spectrum, even if you're at a large company like Nike. When we're working with all kinds of partners in data collaboration, from service providers to other kinds of partners, they need to have quality of compliance coherence that works with ours, because we're all flowing data together. So I think there's, a space for solutions. I even from Nike recommend different tools for smaller companies that we work with to try to get them into the right place. So, I think it's interesting to think you might think at a large company that you always have to build everything because you've got such a custom and bespoke tech stack. But I think if you're really aware of the outer reaches of your consumer data or personal data network, there's probably a place for both kinds of solutions, even from big companies.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead, Beth. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a quick note on that, because I have an interesting story. And, the build versus buy for us, it's not really a question, because we're a small company and, there isn't a desire or an interest in building something like this. There is an interest in, building the integrations points and things where we can do, adapters and ways to make the commercial software work better. But there's an interesting new privacy tech and sort of compliance company that was created by some forward-thinking auto dealers. And it's specifically designed based on the business processes that car dealers in the US use. And it's getting a lot of adoption because it's designed with that particular use case in mind. So I don't know if there's a world where there's the big company, one size fits all enterprise version, and then there's smaller companies or smaller products within companies. But I'm watching this one very intently, and we actually kind of help promote it, because we're trying to help our dealers, just like Anne's trying to help her distributors, to make sure that they can comply with the law and they can do things in the way that they should be, even though they're a small company. So I think there's some opportunities in call it the niche space.
I think that's very, very wise, because we don't often think about those very niche spaces where we don't often have that visibility. The other thing I was thinking about as you were talking there, Beth, was those situations where we just can't maintain certain tools, because if you do build your own platform, you're left with it. And being able to maintain and sustain those tools is an incredibly important challenge. I recognize we've only got a few minutes left, so I kind of want to go around the room and just do the last minute kind of calls to actions and takeaways for the group. And maybe starting from my right, as I can see people, and starting with you, please.
I guess I'll just say, we've seen a lot of reporting in the last few years about privacy tech unicorns. I think there's a lot more space to go. I'm excited to see the innovation that will come next, and I hope that it focuses on the back end.
For sure. Ron.
Yeah, I think we've made a lot of good points around, interoperability and buy versus build. I would really just want everyone to take a step back and try to better understand what they're trying to get out of these toolings. Work with your engineering product teams to really better understand what they would, most benefit from a DPIA or a mapping tool, and really try to, partner with the folks that are going to be consuming this information. So hopefully, as Anne said, some of these, there's a lot of room for improvement in the privacy space, and I'm looking forward to what's in store.
Absolutely. Thomas, what's your thoughts? And definitely you've got a slightly doubled vision on some of this as well. And you're currently on mute, Thomas, just to...
Yeah, sorry, I don't know on which one I should focus now. And I'd say that the privacy tech space is actually very vibrant at the moment. There's a lot going on, and I've heard you, Anne. There is still space beyond the ones that already exist and are already scaling fast. So I think. Will mature as an industry, but people are going to keep iterating and driving change. And I think the work of the job of CPOs is going to be to keep an eye out for new solutions, and that's a job in itself. It takes time, and I think when it comes to privacy tech. Entrepreneurs, they should do what Ron suggested. They should spend a lot of time with privacy folks, with privacy experts, because that's where it's happening. That's where you can actually understand, the needs in market.
Absolutely. Beth, any final thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity. I agree with everybody's comments. I think on the B2B side, any way that the companies can help their clients to, do those use rights, like the access rights, like Anne said, so it follows the data around would be great. And on the consumer side, making sure that those self-service tools are, actually not just only front end, but also the back end. The back end matches the front end, so it's legit.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with all the comments. I think we will remain patient, but optimistic that our solutions are going to be coming forward. And everybody, thank you so much on the panel and indeed in the audience. It's been a great session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.